I remember the silence of that dawn, not as an absence but as a presence, a deep, profound hum that swallowed the world whole. It wasn't the usual hush of a city asleep, but something heavier, colder, like the breath had been stolen from the very air. For a long moment, I lay tangled in my sheets, half convinced I was still dreaming, tracing the edges of a forgotten nightmare. Then my eyes opened, searching for the familiar dance of light through the banyan tree, the emerald canopy that always filtered the morning glow. But there was only a stark, unyielding glare. And beyond the glass, a world bleached, naked, utterly stripped bare. No rustle, no sway, no vibrant green. Just dust motes dancing in a new, terrifying sun. The quiet screamed, and a whisper of dread, cold and sharp, began to tell me what I already knew. They were gone. 1, 3. Instead. The silence of the dawn. I remember the silence of that dawn, not as an absence but as a presence, a deep, profound hum that swallowed the world whole. It wasn't the usual hush of a city asleep, but something heavier, colder, like the breath had been stolen from the very air. For a long moment I lay tangled in my sheets, half convinced I was still dreaming, tracing the edges of a forgotten nightmare. Then my eyes opened, searching for the familiar dance of light through the banyan tree, the emerald canopy that always filtered the morning glow. But there was only a stark, unyielding glare. And beyond the glass, a world bleached, naked, utterly stripped bare. No rustle, no sway, no vibrant green. Just dust motes dancing in a new, terrifying sun. Quiet screamed, and a whisper of dread, cold and sharp, began to tell me what I already knew. They were gone. The memory of that morning is a fragile thing, like a pressed flower, yet its edges remain sharp, pricking at the skin of my mind. It was a stillness I had never known. Our city, usually a symphony of distant traffic, the persistent chirping of sparrows, the rustle of leaves in the humid breeze. It was all muted, as if muffled by an unseen hand. I shifted, the crisp cotton of the sheets a fleeting comfort against the burgeoning unease. My mind, still sluggish from sleep, tried to rationalize it. A Sunday, perhaps, with everyone still tucked away in their homes. But even Sundays held the murmur of awakening life, the distant hum of a bus, the laughter of a child from an open window. This was different. This was empty. My gaze drifted to the window again, drawn by that unsettling, naked light. The banyan tree. It was the anchor of my mornings, its vast, sprawling branches, a living ceiling that filtered the harsh tropical sun into dappled patterns on my floor. I loved the way the wind would whisper through its leaves, a constant, comforting lullaby. But now there was only the pale, unblemished sky. No dark mass of foliage, no intricate network of roots like ancient veins. The window frame stood sentinel over a view utterly barren. It was like looking through a camera lens at a photograph taken, before life itself had begun to paint the world green. A coldness began to spread from my chest, tracing icy lines through my veins. It wasn't just the banyan. The potted orchid on my windowsill, its vibrant fuchsia petals, a testament to my mother's gentle care, was gone. The terracotta pot sat empty, a fine layer of dust already settling inside its hollow. My breath hitched. This wasn't right. This wasn't a trick of the light, or a strange dream from which I would soon wake. The emptiness felt too real, too profound. I pushed myself up, the sheets pooling around my waist like discarded clouds. My bare feet met the cool, smooth tiles of the floor. Each step was unnaturally loud in the profound quiet of the apartment. Even the house plants in the living room, the towering snake plant that guarded the entryway, the trailing money plant that cascaded from a shelf, they were all just not there. Only their empty ceramic pots remained, silent monuments to vanished life. The air? usually thick with the faint earthy scent of living greenery, now felt dry, almost brittle, as if all moisture had been leached from it. A faint, acrid smell, like dry soil and something indefinably metallic, began to prickle at my nose. A creeping dread, insidious and cold, began to coil in my stomach. It whispered of something vast, something irreversible. My fingers, trembling slightly, traced the dusty rim of an empty pot, where the vibrant heart-shaped leaves of the money plant had once trailed. There was only the smooth, cool ceramic. It felt like a memory slipping through my grasp, something that should be there, but wasn't. My reflection in the unadorned window glass showed wide, questioning eyes framed by disheveled dark hair. I looked like a stranger, startled, as if I had woken in a world rearranged without my consent. The silence pressed in, amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. It was a silence that spoke of absence, not peace. It was the sound of the world holding its breath, or perhaps having stopped breathing entirely. With a growing sense of morbid fascination, I moved towards the balcony door. The world outside beckoned, a vast pale canvas waiting to confirm my deepest fears. The curtains, usually pushed aside to let in the filtered green light, hung limp and still. My hand hesitated on the cool metal handle, a primal instinct urging me to retreat, to pull the covers over my head and pretend this was merely a figment of a disturbed mind. But the quiet compelled me forward. I had to know. I had to see. The door swung open with a soft, almost reverent sigh. The city unveiled itself to me, not in its familiar tapestry of vibrant life, but in a stark, terrifying monochrome. The potted plants that usually lined the railing of my neighbors' balconies, the brightly colored bougainvillea, the fragrant jasmine, the sturdy rubber plants, were gone. Not withered, not brown, but egoning, as if they had simply evaporated, leaving behind only empty pots and faint dust rings on the concrete. I stepped out onto the balcony, my gaze sweeping across the street below, then to the park beyond, and further still, to the distant hills that ringed the city. My breath hitched, a choked gasp escaping my lips. The park. It was a beloved oasis in the heart of our bustling urban sprawl. A place of ancient trees, manicured lawns, and riotous flower beds. Now, it was a vast, desolate expanse of brown earth. The mighty rain trees, under which generations had sought shade, were no more than hollowed-out spaces in the air, leaving behind only the impression of their former grandeur on the sun-baked soil. Where lush green grass had once carpeted the ground, there was now only barren, reddish-brown dirt, churned and exposed as if the very skin of the earth had been flayed. The creeping dread transformed into a horrifying certainty, a cold, hard knot of terror in my chest. This wasn't localized. This wasn't a strange blight on my street alone. This was everything. The usually verdant creepers that had clung to the walls of the apartment buildings, transforming concrete into living art, were gone, leaving behind only faint, ghost-like stains where their roots had once clung. The vibrant hedges that bordered driveways and provided privacy between houses had vanished, leaving awkward, exposed gaps. Even the smallest weeds that dared to push through cracks in the pavement were nowhere to be seen. The world was utterly, completely, terrifyingly bald. The sun, usually softened by the countless leaves, now beat down with an unfiltered, brutal intensity. It reflected off the bare concrete, the exposed brick, the dusty streets, creating a blinding glare. The air shimmered, not with heat haze, but with a kind of emptiness. I could see every imperfection, every crack, every discarded piece of litter with unnerving clarity. Without the softening, vibrant blanket of green, the city looked harsh, angular, and strangely vulnerable. It was then, standing on my balcony overlooking a dying world, that the full, crushing weight of the catastrophe truly settled upon me. Every single plant. Not just the big trees, not just the delicate flowers, but every plant. The grasses, the mosses, the algae in the ponds, the microscopic phytoplankton in the oceans. All of it vanished. Overnight. The silence outside was even more profound than in my apartment. No birdsong, for what would they eat? No distant rustle of wind through branches, for there were no branches. The hum I had perceived earlier, the one that swallowed the world, felt like the vibration of a void, the last resonant echo of life before it completely evaporated. A cold, sharp shiver ran down my spine, despite the emerging heat of the sun. This was not merely an absence of life. This was the absence of the very fabric of life. The world had been stripped bare, not by fire or flood, but by an unseen, silent act of erasure. And in that terrifying, stark emptiness, I knew with a chilling certainty that humanity's time had just begun to run out. The whisper of dread that had awoken me now screamed in my mind. They were gone, and with them, so were we. It rained. There. A world undressed. The cold clarity of the morning after swallowed me whole. A weight pressed against my chest. My apartment, once a sanctuary from the city's relentless green, now felt like a glass box suspended over an abyss. I pushed myself from the rumpled sheets, the phantom scent of cut grass and damp earth still clinging to the edges of my memory. A cruel trick of a mind unwilling to accept. The first step out of the building was like stepping onto another planet. Hanoi, always a symphony of emerald and jade, was now a monochrome canvas, bled dry. The narrow alleyway leading to the main street, typically a cool tunnel of interwoven branches and hanging vines, was exposed, raw on eye. The sun, a harsh, unforgiving disk in the sky, beat down directly onto the cracked asphalt, illuminating every pebble, every speck of dust. Where the ancient banyan tree had stood at the alley's mouth, its gnarled roots a comforting embrace around the cracked sidewalk, there was now only a barren crater. The earth was churned, dry and reddish-brown, like a wound in the city's flesh. The air, thin and parched, tasted of finely ground particulate, a constant, gritty whisper against my tongue. The familiar rustle of leaves, the gentle creak of branches, the cheerful chirping of unseen birds, nested deep within the foliage, all gone. A profound, aching silence stretched between the buildings, punctuated only by the distant, disembodied hum of an air conditioner, or the tentative, almost apologetic cough of a neighbor. I remembered, with a pang that twisted my stomach, the morning rituals of Hanoi. The vendors pushing their bicycles laden with fresh flowers, their petals bright splashes of color against the gray. The old women meticulously tending to their potted orchids and jasmine outside their doorways, the air heavy with their fragrance. The young men sharing cigarettes under the shade of a blossoming flamboyant tree, its red flowers a defiant burst of joy. Now, the flower stalls were empty, their baskets overturned and coated in a fine layer of dust. The potted plants, once vibrant sentinels, were reduced to brittle skeletons, their dry roots exposed to the unforgiving sun, their leaves turned to powder. It wasn't just the large trees that had vanished. It was everything. Every blade of grass, every mossy patch on an old wall, every tiny sprout pushing through a crack in the pavement. The city had been stripped bare, as if a colossal, invisible hand had simply wiped away all life that wasn't concrete or human. The main street, Tron Hnyagago, usually a vibrant artery choked with motorbikes and the rhythmic calls of street hawkers, was a scene of bewildered stillness. The sidewalks, once shaded by rows of meticulously pruned trees, were now glaring expanses of sun-baked concrete. Dust, a pervasive, insidious blanket, lay thick on everything. Parked motorbikes, storefront awnings, the intricate carvings of old colonial villas. It swirled in lazy eddies, with the faintest breath of wind, clinging to clothes, getting into eyes, tasting like desolation. I walked, my feet crunching on what felt like pulverized memories. Each step was an act of deliberate resistance against the unreality of it all. My mind, still grappling with the dream logic of the previous hours, tried to overlay the familiar green over this stark new landscape. No, that's where the flame trees used to be, their blossoms like fallen embers. That's where the ancient tamarind tree offered its sweet fruit. But the ghost images wavered, unable to hold against the relentless, blinding reality. Disbelief was a heavy cloak draped over the city. People were emerging from their homes, not with the usual morning rush, but slowly, hesitantly. They stood on their doorsteps, eyes wide, scanning the horizon as if searching for a punchline to a cosmic joke. Their faces, usually etched with the everyday concerns of life, were now blank canvases of confusion. A woman in a traditional ao dai, her basket for the market still clutched in her hand, simply stared at the empty space where her beloved bougain had cascaded over the gate, its fuchsia blooms a constant cheer. Her lips moved, forming silent words, perhaps a prayer, perhaps an accusation. A young couple on a motorbike, usually darting through traffic with easy confidence, were now stopped in the middle of the road, their vehicle an island in a sea of stillness. The driver had taken off his helmet, revealing a face pale with shock. He pointed, a trembling finger indicating the barren park where children used to play under the shade of venerable trees. His girlfriend leaned into him, her face buried in his shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. There was no wailing yet, no outright hysteria, just this profound, stunned silence, like a city holding its breath, waiting for the illusion to break. But the illusion held. The sun climbed higher, relentless, magnifying the absence. The air grew warmer, unmoderated by the cooling presence of transpiring leaves. The dust intensified, catching the light like a million tiny, cruel diamonds. The first whispers of panic began to ripple through the stunned crowds. Not an explosion, but an insidious crawl. A man middle-aged with a perpetually worried frown suddenly stumbled back from the sight of his own front yard, utterly devoid of the lush ferns and flowering plants he had meticulously cultivated. He let out a choked cry, a sound like a broken gasp, and then sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. It was the sound of a dream shattering, of an unspoken nightmare finding its voice. Others, drawn by the quiet distress, turned their heads. One by one, their own faces began to mirror his terror. A domino effect of dawning horror. A woman ran frantically to her small balcony, where her prized collection of bonsai trees had once stood. She reached out, her fingers closing on empty air. Then she let out a shriek that tore through the heavy silence, a primal sound of loss and profound violation. The previously unheard hum of distant motorbikes grew louder, though they still moved with an unnerving slowness, their riders also grappling with the unthinkable. Drivers peered from their windows, their faces contorted in a mix of confusion and fear. Accidents, small fender benders, began to occur as drivers momentarily forgot to steer, their gazes fixed on the impossible desolation outside. A taxi driver, his face ashen, pulled over to the side, his hand still gripping the wheel, his eyes fixed on the empty boulevards that had once been tree-lined avenues. News alerts, previously ignored on my phone, began to pop up with increasing urgency. "Global phenomenon," one headline screamed, its words jarring against the quiet reality unfolding around me. Scientists, baffled. Oxygen levels, decreasing. The last one, a small, unassuming line, was the most chilling. It was the logical conclusion, the inevitable consequence of a world stripped bare. It brought a cold, sharp dread that pierced through the hazy disbelief. The initial confusion was giving way to an urgent, terrible understanding. People weren't just looking at the barren landscape anymore. They were looking at each other, their eyes silently asking the same question. What now? The air, already thick with dust, now seemed to vibrate with an unspoken terror. The city's rhythm, which had been merely paused, now threatened to shatter entirely. I saw a group of men, normally lounging around a small tea stall, now huddled together, their faces grim, their voices low and urgent. Their hands gestured wildly at the sky, at the naked buildings, at the empty spaces where life had thrived just hours before. One man, normally boisterous, was clutching his head, his body swaying. The subtle shift in the city's sounds was becoming pronounced. The casual chatter had ceased, replaced by hushed, urgent conversations, punctuated by gasps and cries. Melodic sounds of Vietnamese, usually a comforting backdrop, now carried an undertone of raw fear. The breeze, what little there was, no longer carried the scent of damp earth or blooming jasmine, but the dry, acrid smell of pulverized concrete and baked soil. It carried the growing murmur of a city waking up to its own extinction. And I, Lin, stood amidst it all, a silent observer in this waking nightmare, feeling the weight of the world's breath being stolen, one dusty, agonizing minute at a time. The silence had screamed before. Now, it was beginning to hum with the low, rising thrum of human despair. Oh! The gasp of a city. The sun climbed higher, a disk of brutal, unblinking light in the vacant sky. What had been a strange, unsettling silence at dawn now began to morph into something else entirely. Something far more sinister. The quiet that had screamed absence earlier now seemed to press in, a palpable weight. It was as if the air itself had solidified, becoming thick, reluctant, each molecule holding stubbornly to its place, refusing to yield. I remember watching the dust motes still dancing in the stark light that poured through my window. They whirled with an aimless grace, indifferent to the fact that the very medium supporting them was beginning to betray us. My chest felt tighter. Not an acute pain, but a subtle clenching, as though a gentle hand was pressing down on my sternum. It was easy at first to dismiss it. Perhaps the lingering tendrils of that strange dream. Perhaps the sheer shock of the world outside, bleached and barren. But then, the slight rasp in my throat became a persistent dryness. And the simple act of inhaling, which had always been a subconscious rhythm, transformed into a mindful effort. I found myself taking deeper, more deliberate breaths, each one a conscious transaction with the air around me. It felt thin. Yes, that was it. Thin, yet heavy. A paradox that settled in my lungs. My gaze drifted to the street below. Already, the initial shock had given way to a frenetic, aimless energy. People spilled from buildings, not rushing, but stumbling, their faces tilted towards the sky, mouths agape. There was a woman on the opposite balcony, her hand pressed to her chest, her other arm extended, as if reaching for something invisible. Her lips moved, forming silent screams, the sound swallowed by the suffocating hush. The air, which had seemed empty before, now felt full of an unspoken truth. It was the same air, yet it was not. Like a cup of water, clear and unassuming, slowly, imperceptibly, draining away. And as it drained, it left behind not emptiness, but a dense, suffocating residue. Carbon dioxide, I dimly recalled from some forgotten school lesson. The plants, our silent green benefactors, had absorbed it, exchanged it for life. And now without them, the balance was shifting, tilting towards an unseen, unbreathing death. A low thrum began in my ears, a subtle pressure behind my eyes. My vision seemed to dim at the edges, as if I were looking through a hazy film. I closed my eyes, trying to clear it, but the feeling persisted, a dull ache behind my temples. My heart, normally a steady drum, began to tap a faster rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't panic yet, not for me. It was more like a slow, inexorable descent, a silent promise being kept. Across the street, a man suddenly fell to his knees, clutching his throat. He wasn't coughing, not exactly. It was more like a dry, desperate gasp, his body convulsing with the effort. His neighbor rushed to him, equally struggling, hands fluttering uselessly. There was no wound, no visible attacker, just the air, slowly, deliberately, turning against them. It was in these moments, watching from my window, that a strange sense of detachment settled over me. It was as if I were an observer, a ghost already, watching the final act of a play that had been running for millennia. The sadness was profound, yes, like a deep, aching wound in the soul, but it was accompanied by an almost dreamlike resignation. This was it, then, the true ending, not with fire or flood, but with a quiet, collective holding of breath. The sounds from the street began to escalate, not shouts of anger or fear, not yet, but sounds of effort, wheezing, gasping, the ragged, forced exhalations of people fighting for what should have been effortless. A distant wail, thin and reedy, like a forgotten spirit, pierced the heavy quiet. Then another. Sirens, their urgency muted, as if even they struggled to cut through the thickening atmosphere. I thought of the banyan tree, the one that had graced my morning view for so many years. Its sprawling roots, its ancient wisdom, its whispering leaves, all gone. And with it, the very breath of the world. It felt like a memory, a phantom limb that still ached. I could almost feel the cool shade of its canopy, the gentle rush of air it had exhaled, fresh and sweet. Now, there was only the sun, harsh and indifferent, casting long, stark shadows over a lifeless landscape. My own breathing became shallower, more rapid. Each inhale felt like pulling against resistance, drawing in a substance that offered little sustenance. My body instinctively demanded more, but there was less to give. It was a cruel irony, this slow strangulation, this suffocation in an ocean of air. The invisible became terrifyingly real, manifesting as a growing pressure in my chest, a blurring of my vision, a dull, insistent headache. The collective panic was a soundless roar. People stumbled out of their homes, their eyes wide, searching. Some stood stock still, rooted in despair, their hands pressed over their mouths, as if to hold on to the last vestiges of oxygen within their own lungs. Others ran, aimlessly, blindly, perhaps hoping to outrun the invisible tide that was rising around them. There were those who frantically tried to break open car windows or smash glass doors, as if the air inside their enclosed spaces would be different, richer. But it was all the same. The air was a shared curse, a universal tightening. Children cried, a thin, reedy sound that tore at what was left of the soul. Parents clutched them close, their own faces gray, lips tinged blue. I saw a mother on the sidewalk, her child nestled in her arms, both of them rocking gently, their eyes closed, as if drifting into a final shared sleep. It was heartbreaking, yet strangely beautiful in its quiet surrender. My own limbs felt heavy, my thoughts growing sluggish, like syrup. The world outside, the chaos unfolding, felt distant, muffled. It was as if a thick pane of glass separated me from their struggle, allowing me to observe without fully participating. This wasn't indifference, not truly. It was an almost primal instinct of self-preservation, a mental retreat into a space where the air still felt thin but manageable, where the encroaching suffocation was a concept, not yet a complete reality. My mind, perhaps, was trying to cushion the blow, to soften the edges of oblivion. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I leaned against the window frame, my forehead pressing against the cool glass. The street below swayed slightly, the figures of struggling people blurring into indistinct smudges. I closed my eyes again, and the world behind my eyelids was a kaleidoscope of swirling colors, like embers dying in a grate. I felt a faint, sweet taste on my tongue, metallic and strange. It was the taste of low oxygen, I knew. The taste of dying. The sounds became less distinct. The individual gasps and wheezes merged into a continuous, low hum, a morbid chorus of a million failing lungs. Even the distant sirens seemed to be fading, their power weakening with each passing minute, their drivers undoubtedly struggling as much as those they sought to help. What help could there be, anyway, when the very air, the foundation of all life, was the enemy? I opened my eyes and looked at my reflection in the glass. My face was pale, my lips slightly parted, a faint blue tinge around them. My eyes, however, seemed unnaturally bright, reflecting the stark, naked light of the sun. There was a profound quiet within me, even as the world outside was consumed by its last desperate gasp. It was the silence of acceptance, of a dream ending. The oxygen was depleting, yes, but more than that, hope was depleting. And in its place, a strange, sad tranquility was taking hold, a surrender to the inevitable as the invisible threat, no longer a whisper, screamed its terrifying reality into the void. The echoes of green memory. The world outside Lynn's apartment window was no longer just bleached. It was beginning to fray at the edges. The stark, unyielding glare of the sun had deepened into an almost sickly yellow, reflecting off the pale, lifeless concrete and glass, creating a landscape that felt brittle, fragile. The dust motes, once dancing innocently, now swirled in miniature, mournful eddies, hinting at the vast, desolate stretches beyond the city's immediate confines. The quiet had splintered. A low, persistent hum had begun to permeate the air. The sound of a million tiny, unseen mechanisms of panic, churning in the collective unconscious of a city, suddenly made aware of its own terminal illness. Distant sirens, thin and reedy, like the last cries of newborn birds, stitched the silence with threads of dread. But Lynn, curled on her sofa, a blanket pulled tight around her, found her mind recoiling from the encroaching clamor, seeking refuge not in denial, but in the echoes of a life that felt impossibly distant. Her eyes, though open, saw nothing of the crumbling present. Instead, they swam in a verdant sea, a landscape so vibrant, so utterly jalavain, that it seemed impossible it could ever have existed, let alone been extinguished. A whisper, soft as the rustle of leaves that were no more, began to tell her story. It began with the feel of cool, slick mud squishing between her bare toes, a sensation so primal, so deeply ingrained in her memory, that it could almost bring tears to her eyes now. She was small again, a child, her Ao Baba, the simple peasant blouse and trousers, rolled up to her knees, her conical non-la hat tilted against the sun. Before her, stretching to the horizon where the sky met the earth in a hazy, humid embrace, were the rice paddies, a vast, shimmering tapestry of emerald and jade, undulating gently in the soft breeze. Each stalk, a slender blade of life, drank deeply from the flooded fields, reflecting the sky in a million tiny mirrors. She remembered the way the light played on the water's surface, 1,000 fractured suns dancing across the green. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, of growing things, of distant wood smoke from neighboring farmhouses. It was a smell that promised sustenance, life, the very breath of her ancestors. The sound, too, was a symphony. The gentle swish, swish of the rice stalks as the wind combed through them, like a giant, benevolent hand. The tireless hum of cicadas in the bordering trees, a constant, drowsy lullaby. The occasional croak of a frog, startlingly loud from beneath a broad lily pad. And sometimes the distant, melodic clang of a buffalo bell, or the high-pitched, joyous shouts of children playing a game of catch with a discarded coconut husk. Her small hands, guided by her father's calloused ones, would plunge into the cool water, carefully separating the young rice seedlings from their bundles, feeling the fragile roots, then pressing them gently into the soft mud. It was back-breaking work, even for the adults, but for Lin, it was a ritual of connection, a silent conversation with the earth. Every tiny seedling she planted was a promise, a hope. She remembered the rhythm of it, the stoop and press, the slow, steady progression across the field, alongside her parents, her aunts and uncles, her cousins. Collective ballet of cultivation, born of ancient knowledge, passed down through generations. During the scorching midday heat, they would rest under the shade of a colossal banyan tree, its aerial roots dangling like ancient bearded spirits. Lin would lie back, gazing up into the canopy, watching the sun dapple through the leaves, creating shifting patterns on her face. She'd listen to the quiet murmur of her family, their voices soft with fatigue and contentment, sharing stories, planning for the harvest, or simply resting in comfortable silence. Sometimes a dragonfly, its wings iridescent like stained glass, would hover near her face, its delicate body a tiny marvel of engineering. She'd chase them, laughing, her bare feet splashing through the shallow water at the edge of the fields, sending tiny fish darting away. The rice paddies weren't just fields of food. They were the arteries of their existence, the heart of their village. They dictated the rhythm of life. The planting season, the growing season, the harvest. They were where stories were told, where children learned responsibility, where families bonded over shared labor and shared dreams. They were vast, open spaces that somehow felt intimately hers, imprinted on her soul. A place of endless green, endless sky, and endless possibility. A world teeming with life. A vibrant hum that was the very antithesis of the silence that now screamed. As the vision of the expansive paddies began to shimmer at the edges, dissolving into the familiar haze of memory, another image coalesced, more intimate, more fragrant. It was her grandmother's garden. Not a grand sprawling expanse, but a small, meticulously tended plot behind their simple wooden house, nestled beside the back porch. It was a riot of green. Yes, but a different green. Darker, richer, layered with 1,000 textures and shades, interspersed with flashes of color from tiny flowers. The smell hit her first, even in her memory. A complex, intoxicating perfume that no manufactured scent could ever replicate. It was the sharp, peppery tang of mint, BSCH, the earthy sweetness of basil, Hung Kuo, with its purple-tinged leaves, the bright citrusy notes of lemongrass, SS, the fresh, clean scent of coriander. Interwoven with these familiar culinary herbs were the deeper, more medicinal scents of traditional remedies. Ginger, jianjane, turmeric, and yhha, and the faint, star anise perfume that clung to her grandmother's cooking pots. Her grandmother, slight and stooped with age, her face a roadmap of gentle wrinkles, would be kneeling amongst the plants, her nimble fingers plucking weeds with an almost surgical precision. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each touch a caress. Lynn remembered sitting beside her on a small worn wooden stool, holding a woven basket. Her grandmother would teach her, patiently, the name of each herb, its unique properties, how to care for it, and most importantly, how to use it in the kitchen, or as a healing balm. "This, little one," she'd whisper, her voice like dry leaves rustling, holding up a cluster of vibrant green leaves, "is for the foe. It sings with the broth." Or, holding a bruised lemongrass stalk, "And this for your cough, if the winter wind bites too hard." The garden was a universe in miniature. Bees hummed lazily amongst the blossoms, their buzzing a comforting, persistent drone. Ladybugs, like tiny jewels, crawled along the stems. Butterflies, with wings like painted silk, would flit from flower to flower, chasing unseen currents of air. The sound of her grandmother's soft humming, a wordless melody of contentment, would drift through the air, occasionally punctuated by the distant crackle of wood burning in the outdoor stove, where fragrant meals were always simmering. Lynn's favorite task was helping to pick the herbs for dinner. Her grandmother would guide her hands, teaching her to pluck only the freshest leaves, to leave enough for the plant to thrive. The herbs, once picked, would release an even more intense burst of fragrance, coating her fingers in their essential oils. She remembered the warmth of the sun on her back, as she bent over the beds, the cool earth beneath her knees, the feeling of utter peace. The garden was a place of secrets shared, of wisdom passed down, of silent, abiding love. It was where her grandmother's hands, gnarled with a lifetime of labor, transformed simple leaves into fragrant poultices, into the soul of a simmering broth, into the very essence of home. It was a place where life was celebrated, nurtured, and transformed, a place of profound connection and boundless generosity. The vividness of the memories was almost unbearable now. The emerald expanse of the paddies, alive with the promise of harvest. The intimate, fragrant sanctuary of her grandmother's garden, humming with the quiet industry of bees, and the soft murmur of ancient wisdom. They were not just memories. They were a feeling, a deep, pervasive sense of belonging, of life, of purpose. But the phantom sense began to dissipate, the vibrant colors to fade. The soft rustle of invisible leaves was drowned out by the increasingly insistent wail of sirens outside. The distant hum of panic had grown into a palpable tremor that vibrated through the floorboard. Lynn's eyes opened, truly opened this time, to the desolate present. The silence, no longer merely profound, had become predatory. It coiled around her, cold and heavy, a suffocating shroud. And the memory, once a comforting dream, now sharpened into a piercing, agonizing ache. What had been was gone, and the world, utterly stripped bare, stood as a monument to its absence. The fading scent of jasmine. The dawn, once a symphony of distant traffic, and the rustle of leaves, had become a canvas of profound, echoing silence. It pressed in, a physical weight that seemed to drain the very color from the air. My initial shock, a cold splinter in my chest, had begun to thaw, giving way to a gnawing, frantic certainty. They were gone, all of them. And with that dreadful knowledge came the most primal of urgings. Hunger. Not the gentle ache of a skipped meal, but a premonition of a hunger so absolute, so fundamental. It curled into a tight knot in my gut, demanding attention. Oh! It wasn't just me. Across the city, in the bleached, naked light of the sun, the realization dawned on millions. The initial disbelief morphed into a frantic, collective scramble. The streets, usually teeming with morning commuters and vendors, became a surreal tableau. People emerged from their homes, some still in pajamas, drawn by an invisible current toward the places where sustenance was once abundant. The air, devoid of the familiar earthy scent of soil and the sweet perfume of distant blossoms, carried only the dry, metallic tang of dust and a growing human desperation. I joined the silent procession, my feet moving, as if in a dream, leading me instinctively towards the nearest market. The scene was less a chaotic riot and more a quiet, horrifying performance of futility. Supermarket doors hung ajar, their interiors laid bare. Not a single shelf remained undisturbed. But it wasn't just the fresh produce section, a gaping, hollow expanse where vibrant greens and reds once lay, that shocked. It was the aisles beyond. The rice sacks, once stacked high in gleaming white and brown, were ripped open, empty husks scattering across the floor like discarded skins. The noodle shelves, the bread displays, the canned goods, all utterly, terrifyingly barren. People stood amidst the wreckage, their faces etched with a dawning horror, tracing the edges of what was no longer there. A woman in a faded dye knelt by a shattered jar of pickled vegetables, her hand hovering as if to conjure the forgotten bounty. A child, no older than 5, whimpered softly, reaching for an imaginary banana on a hook that now held nothing but air. It wasn't just the obvious. The processed foods, the biscuits, the sugary drinks, the instant coffee, all gone, or what remained was quickly understood to be useless. Sugar, flour, vegetable oils, corn syrup, starches, flavorings derived from fruits and spices. The hidden, ubiquitous presence of plants in every facet of our diet became starkly, brutally clear. The cereal boxes, the crisps, the sauces, the very packaging, often made from paper products, all remnants of a world that had ceased to exist. Even the air that circulated through the ventilation systems carried the stale scent of human panic, not the living breath of a world exhaling oxygen. A man, his eyes wide and unfocused, picked up an empty packet of instant noodles, turning it over and over in his hands, as if it held the secret to a vanished world. "No, no rice," he whispered, his voice thin and reedy. "No, anything." His words hung in the air, a chilling echo of the truth. We were utterly, utterly dependent, not just on the plants we ate directly, but on the silent, unseen threads they wove through the entire fabric of our food chain. The animals we ate, the very air we breathed, the materials we used, all were downstream from that vibrant green current that had now simply, definitively, stopped flowing. Quiet, which had once been a presence, now felt like a vacuum, sucking the life and the hope out of everything. The sounds of human despair were muted, almost reverent, as if we were all observing a funeral for the world. My own stomach clenched, a physical manifestation of the profound emptiness that had begun to settle deep within my bones. It was a hunger that transcended the body, a spiritual starvation for what was lost. And then, as if summoned by the dry, choking dust that coated my tongue, a memory surfaced. Not a sharp, clear image, but a slow, unfolding sensation, like the uncurling of a fern in a forgotten forest. It was the scent. Jasmine. It was the scent of my mother's garden, the one that clung to the evening air like a lover's embrace, heavy and sweet, intoxicating. I remembered the trellis, stretching across the back wall of our small house, a living curtain of emerald leaves and star-like white blossoms. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, the jasmine would begin its nightly performance. My mother would sit on the small wooden bench beneath it, her hands in her lap, her eyes closed, simply breathing in the fragrance. Sometimes she would pluck a few blossoms, their petals cool and velvety beneath her fingertips, and tuck them into my hair, their perfume following me like a benevolent spirit. I could almost feel the dew-kissed petals against my cheek, the way they held the moonlight, tiny, fragile constellations against the dark green. The air around the trellis was always thick with it, a heady, almost narcotic sweetness that promised peace, comfort, and an endless abundance of life. It spoke of cool nights, of soft whispers, of the simple, undeniable beauty of growth. It was the scent of home, of childhood, of a world that hummed with life, a gentle, nurturing presence that was always there, an unthinking certain. I remembered the way the light filtered through the dense leaves, dappling the ground in shifting patterns of sun and shade, the quiet hum of unseen insects drawn to the nectar, the gentle sway of the vines in a phantom breeze, the sheer, overwhelming vibrancy of it all. It wasn't just a plant. It was a feeling, a memory woven into the very fabric of my being, a promise of continuity. Now, in the sterile, dust-choked reality of the present, the memory of that scent was a cruel, exquisite torture. It hung in the emptiness of my mind, a ghost of something so exquisitely beautiful, so utterly alive, that its absence was a physical wound. The dry air in my lungs burned, deprived of the oxygen once exhaled by a billion such blossoms. The silence in my ears screamed, devoid of the tiny rustles and hums that once animated the garden. The hunger in my gut twisted, not just for food, but for the very essence of that lost world. The jasmine, once a simple joy, now amplified the profound emptiness, the vast, echoing void left behind. It wasn't just the loss of sustenance. It was the loss of beauty, of comfort, of the very poetry of existence. The world had been stripped bare, not just of its green cloak, but of its fragrance, its breath, its soul. And I, Lin, stood amidst the ruins, a phantom scent clinging to my memory, a whisper of what was, making the silence of what was no more. Truly unbearable. The hours were ticking down, each one a stark reminder that the well of life had run dry, and the last drops of memory were all we had left. Dusty pilgrimage. The air grew heavier with each tick of the silent clock. Or perhaps it was lighter, impossibly thin, stretched taut across a world struggling to breathe. My lungs ached, a deep, burning sensation that settled beneath my ribs, a constant, dull throb. It was no longer just the fear of suffocation. It was the slow, agonizing reality of it. The city, once a symphony of honking horns and murmuring crowds, had devolved into a low, desultory moan, punctuated by the occasional distant crash, like a tired world giving up its last breath. The communal silence I'd awoken to days ago had deepened, becoming an oppressive shroud, woven from dust and despair. I sat by the window, not daring to open it, watching the sky bleed a sickly yellow-orange, the sun a malevolent eye in a bleached firmament. The banyan tree, the one that had always greeted me with its leafy embrace, was now a skeletal monument, its gnarled branches reaching like arthritic fingers into the void. Its leaves, if they ever truly existed, were long gone, mere phantoms of memory. Dust, a fine, omnipresent powder, coated everything, muffling sound, blurring the edges of a reality I no longer recognized. It clung to the glass, to my skin, to the inside of my nose and throat, a constant reminder of the world's desiccation. A quiet certainty settled over me, not a sudden revelation, but the slow, inevitable unfolding of a truth that had been whispered since the first dawn. There was nothing left here, in this concrete tomb. The city's pulse had flatlined. Survival, if it could even be called that, was not measured in days or hours anymore, but in breaths. Each inhale was a conscious effort, a fight against the invisible, encroaching void. My mind, weary and burdened, drifted to the image of my grandmother's house, nestled deep in the village, a scattering of tiled roofs and earthen paths nestled amongst what used to be a riot of green. It was a place where the scent of jasmine and damp earth always lingered, a place where the wind carried the rustle of bamboo and the distant call of a cuckoo. A dream, certainly, a ghost of a memory. But the thought of it, even in its ravaged state, held a fragile promise of solace, a connection to something rooted, something that had endured for generations, even if only in spirit. The decision was not born of hope, but of a quiet resignation, a primal instinct to return to the source, to lie down on familiar earth. I couldn't stay here, waiting for the air to run out completely, surrounded by the hollow echoes of a once vibrant metropolis. There was a faint chance, a whisper of a possibility that the air might be marginally less suffocating outside the city's concrete canyons. Or perhaps it was just the comforting illusion of space, of not being trapped. I gathered what little I had left, a small bottle of water already half empty, a few dry biscuits, a faded scarf to cover my mouth and nose against the relentless dust. My grandmother's silver locket, a tiny smooth pebble against my palm, was already around my neck. It felt heavy, a counterweight to the lightness of my chest. I avoided the mirror. I didn't want to see the ghost staring back. Stepping out of the apartment building felt like entering a different dimension. The common areas, usually bustling with hurried footsteps and muffled conversations, were eerily quiet. A forgotten toy lay on the landing, coated in dust, a poignant memento of a childhood abruptly ended. The air in the stairwell was thicker, stagnant, clinging to my lungs like wet cloth. Every step was a deliberate act, a minor victory against the growing exhaustion. The street outside was a tableau of quiet despair. No panicked screams, no violent riots, just a profound, unsettling stillness. Cars sat abandoned, their doors ajar, their windows reflecting the dead sky. A lonely plastic bag danced a slow, mournful waltz down the middle of the road, propelled by a phantom breeze. The world was being stripped, not with a bang, but with a whimper, a slow, agonizing exhale. I saw them as I walked, fragments of a shattered society, each person a living testament to what was lost. A young mother sat on a curb, holding a small child tightly to her chest. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on some point beyond the horizon. There was no sound from the child, no cries, no whimpers, just the silent, desperate embrace. The air around them seemed to shimmer, thick with unspoken grief. I walked past, my feet heavy, the dust rising in small, ephemeral clouds with each step. I didn't dare meet their gaze, afraid of what might pass between us. A shared acknowledgement of the inevitable that would shatter my own fragile resolve. Further on, a man sat slumped against a wall, his head bowed, a hand pressed to his mouth. He wasn't crying, not outwardly, but his shoulders shook with a silent tremor. A few empty water bottles lay scattered around him. He looked like a statue carved from sorrow, slowly eroding under the relentless sun. I remembered the market that used to thrive on this street, the vibrant colors of fresh produce, the bustling energy, the aroma of fried shallots and sweet rice cakes. Now, only the dust remained, a blanket over everything. The stalls were overturned, their wares vanished, leaving only a skeletal outline of what had been. The oxygen was a cruel trickster, sometimes feeling almost normal for a moment, only to thin out again, forcing me to gasp, to consciously pull air into my burning lungs. My head throbbed, a dull ache behind my eyes. Each breath was a reminder of the precious commodity slipping away. The silence amplified my own ragged breathing, the thump-thump of my heart, a frantic drum against the dying world. As I ventured further from the dense core of the city, the buildings became sparser, giving way to barren fields, once vibrant with rice paddies. Now the earth was cracked and dry, an endless expanse of ochre, stretching to meet the hazy horizon. The wind, when it came, was not a refreshing breath, but a hot, dry gust, carrying more dust, biting at my exposed skin. It was a wind that carried no scent of flowers or damp earth, only the memory of their absence. I remembered the feel of warm mud between my toes in the paddies, the sight of emerald shoots reaching for the sun, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the afternoon heat. These memories, once vivid and immediate, now felt like old dreams, fragments from a forgotten life. They were beautiful but painful, like phantom limbs aching for what was no longer there. I saw more people, scattered like lonely pebbles across the desolate landscape. A group of men, once farmers perhaps, stood rigidly in the middle of a barren field, their faces upturned to the sky, as if imploring a deity that had long since abandoned them. There was no anger, no panic, just a terrible, quiet resignation etched onto their features. Another woman sat under the skeletal remains of what might have been a small tree, its branches stark against the pale sky, slowly turning a handheld fan, though there was no air to stir. It was a futile gesture, a silent prayer for a breeze that would never come. Each step was a journey further into the heart of the loss. The world wasn't just losing oxygen. It was losing its soul. The vibrant tapestry of life had unraveled, thread by thread, leaving behind only the stark, brittle skeleton. The deeper I went, the more profound the realization became. It wasn't just the plants. It was the entire intricate web. The insects, the birds, the hidden creatures of the undergrowth, they were all gone. The silence wasn't just the absence of human noise. It was the silence of a world fundamentally broken, the deep, resonant hum of an empty tomb. My legs ached, my throat felt raw, and my vision blurred at the edges. But the quiet pull towards the village, towards the familiar, remained. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, not to salvation, but to a final resting place, a place where the memories of what was once green might be strong enough to cradle me through the last long night. The sun, a relentless furnace, dipped lower, painting the dust-filled sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. Night was coming, a profound darkness that would swallow the last whispers of life, and with it, the truth. We were all just dust motes, dancing in a new, terrifying silence, waiting for the final, quiet breath. A farewell to fields. The engine of the repurposed delivery van groaned its last, shuddering to a halt at the edge of what used to be the village path. The dust, fine and red, rose in a lazy cloud, then settled back onto the parched, unyielding earth. Lynn stepped out, her boots crunching on something that wasn't quite gravel, not quite soil, but a pulverized grit that had once been rich, living ground. The air was thick, still, and tasted of dry sorrow. It was a taste she was beginning to recognize as the flavor of the new world. Her eyes scanned the horizon, a familiar sweep of land now alien and stark. This was where the jade-green tapestry of rice paddies once stretched, undulating with the whispers of the wind, each seedling a promise of sustenance, a vibrant thread in the fabric of their life. Now, the promise was broken, the threads frayed and gone. What lay before her was a vast, ochre-brown expanse, a canvas painted only with desolation. Deep fissures like ancient scars crisscrossed the landscape, some wide enough to swallow a child, others mere hairline fractures, delicate yet devastating. They were the veins of a dying earth, parched and collapsed. The water buffalo, usually wallowing in muddy pools, their backs slick with cool contentment, were nowhere to be seen. Perhaps they, too, had succumbed to the thirsty silence, their massive bodies returned to the dust from which they came. She remembered, as if tracing a phantom limb, the feeling of her bare feet sinking into the cool, yielding mud between the rice stalks, the gentle sloshing sound as she walked, the myriad tiny lives that teemed beneath the surface. Dragonflies with wings like stained glass would hover and dart, their iridescent bodies catching the sunlight. Frogs would croak their nightly symphony, a chorus that lulled her to sleep. The scent of wet earth and growing rice, a sweet, almost intoxicating perfume, had been the very breath of this place. Now only the metallic tang of dust clung to her tongue, a constant reminder of absence. The sun, unfiltered by any canopy, beat down with an unmerciful intensity, bleaching the very air. The shadows, when they fell, were sharp and unforgiving, offering no respite, no cool embrace. This was not the village she had left, vibrant and verdant, but a skeletal echo, stripped bare. A strange, almost detached calm settled over her. It was the calm of inevitability, the quiet surrender to a fate already sealed. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one a soft thud against the hardened ground. The small, familiar houses, once nestled amidst bamboo groves and fruit trees, now stood exposed, their weathered walls stark against the bleached sky. There were no children's laughter, no distant shouts of vendors, no clatter of pots from open kitchens. Only the wind, when it stirred, whispered through empty eaves, a dry, mournful sigh. She found her way to the narrow dirt path that led to her childhood home. It was still there, remarkably, its terracotta roof gleaming dull in the harsh light, its wooden shutters slightly askew. The small garden that had once flanked the entrance, a riot of bougainvillea and jasmine, was now a patch of brittle, desiccated stalks, barely recognizable. She pushed open the gate, its rusty hinges groaning in protest, a sound that seemed terribly loud in the profound quiet. The house felt like a hollowed-out shell, echoing with ghosts. The air inside was warm, stagnant, carrying the faint, lingering scent of turmeric and old wood, mingling with the new, acrid smell of decay and dry dust. Sunlight, unfiltered by leaves, poured in through the open doorway and cracks in the shutters, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the heavy air. Each particle seemed to shimmer, a tiny fleeting star in a dying universe. Her fingers trailed along the rough-hewn wooden banister of the short staircase leading to the sleeping loft, remembering the feel of the cool, smooth wood beneath her palm when she would slide down it as a child. Her grandmother, with her gentle, knowing eyes, would pretend to scold her, a smile always playing on her lips. Grandmother had taught her how to recognize the subtle shift in the wind that foretold rain, how to listen to the rustle of the bamboo and know if a snake was passing by, how to differentiate the sweet fragrance of night-blooming jasmine from the heady scent of frangipani. All the lessons of a world now gone. She moved into the main living area, her gaze drifting to the small, intricately carved wooden cabinet, where her mother kept the family's collection of ceramic teacups. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the cool, smooth surface of a cup painted with delicate lotus flowers, their petals unfurling in a vibrant, impossible blue. She remembered her mother meticulously tending to the lotus pond just beyond the back door, a shimmering rectangle of green pads and pink blossoms, home to darting fish and buzzing bees. The pond had been their mirror to the sky, reflecting clouds and stars, its surface often ruffled by a passing breeze, carrying the scent of damp earth and sweet water. Now, she knew, it would be nothing but a dry basin, the earth beneath it cracked and thirsty, the lotus roots long since withered into dust. The thought made a fresh ache blossom in her chest, sharp and immediate. The lotus, the very symbol of purity and rebirth in their culture, was gone. And with it, the possibility of anything ever blooming again. Her eyes fell upon a woven straw mat, neatly rolled in a corner. She knelt, unrolling it slowly, the dry straw rasping against itself. This mat, she recalled, had been their resting place during the sweltering afternoons, laid out on the cool tile floor. She would lie there, half dozing, listening to the drone of cicadas from the mango tree outside, the gentle clucking of the chickens in the yard, the distant calls of vendors from the village market. The world had hummed with life then, a symphony of organic sounds. Now the silence pressed in, heavy and absolute, broken only by the faint, far-off hum of the city's remaining infrastructure. A dying mechanical heartbeat. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the cicada song, the scent of ripe mangoes falling to the earth. But the memories were fading, like old photographs bleaching in the relentless sun. She walked into the small, open-air kitchen at the back of the house. The clay cooking stove, blackened with years of use, stood cold and silent. Her hand lingered over the pestle and mortar, the granite cool and heavy. She remembered the rhythmic thud as her grandmother pounded chilies and herbs, the air filling with the pungent, fresh scents of lemongrass, galangal, and kaffir lime leaves, ingredients that sprung from the earth, now vanished. Every meal, every comforting aroma, had been a testament to the generosity of the land. Now, the kitchen felt like a tomb, a shrine to vanished sustenance. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, a swallow in flight, hung by a string from the doorframe. Her father had carved it for her when she was a child, its smooth wings polished by countless touches. She reached for it, her fingers tracing the delicate curve of its tail feathers. She remembered him sitting on the porch, his calloused hands working meticulously with a small knife, surrounded by shavings of fragrant wood. He would whistle softly as he worked, a tune as light and free as the birds he loved. Birds, she thought, depended on seeds, on insects, on the very foliage that was gone. Had they, too, fallen silent? Were there no more songs in the world? The silence outside was her answer. The swallow, once a symbol of spring and hope, now hung motionless, a frozen memory. She ascended the steep ladder to the sleeping loft, her bare feet silent on the worn wooden rung. Her small bed was still there, a thin mattress on a bamboo frame. Sunlight streamed through the single window, illuminating the dust motes again. From this window, she used to watch the vast banyan tree in the communal courtyard, its ancient roots snaking across the ground, its myriad leaves shimmering emerald in the sun. A universe of life humming within its branches. It had been their protector, their silent witness, a towering guardian that had stood for centuries. The knowledge that it, too, would be nothing but a desiccated skeleton, if even that was a fresh wound. She didn't dare look out the window. She couldn't bear to see its ghost. Lynn sat on the edge of her bed, the bamboo creaking softly under her weight. She pulled her knees to her chest, resting her chin on them, gazing blankly at the opposite wall. The simple act of touching these objects, these fragments of a life she had lived, brought forth a tidal wave of grief. It wasn't just the plants that were gone. It was the entire ecosystem of her existence, the intricate web of life and memory woven by the natural world. The sun-drenched days spent chasing butterflies through the fields, the cool evenings under the shade of the mango tree, the sound of rain drumming on the banana leaves, the taste of freshly picked herbs in her mother's soup. All of it dissolved into dust. She felt the quiet, not as an absence of sound, but as an overwhelming presence, a profound sorrow that seeped into her bones. It was the whisper of a world ending, not with a bang, but with the soft, almost imperceptible crumble of every green thing. And in that whisper, she heard the echoes of every leaf that had ever unfurled, every root that had ever held the earth, every flower that had ever bloomed. It was a lament, a dirge for a vibrant, breathing planet, now gasping its last. She closed her eyes and let the silent tears fall, hot tracks on her dust-smudged cheeks, each one a tiny rivulet for the vanished rivers of her world. This final pilgrimage, this quiet farewell, was all that was left. Her home was here, But the world that made it home, the green heart of it all, was gone. And soon, she knew, so would she be. The silent scream, and the whisper of dread, cold and sharp, told her it was almost over. The weight of emptiness. The sun was no longer a fierce, demanding eye in the sky. It had softened, dissolving into a diffuse, sallow glow, as if straining to pierce through an invisible veil. The air, once merely still and dry, had thickened, growing heavy and viscous, pressing down with a palpable weight. It tasted like dust and absence, a metallic tang that lingered on the tongue. Looking up, I saw not the azure expanse I remembered, nor the fiery hues of a usual sunset, but a canvas smeared with sickly ochre and a muted bruised violet, like a faded bruise across the heavens. It was a sky sick with suffocation, a mirror of the world's slow, agonizing exhale. The day had bled out, drop by languid drop, leaving behind a silence more profound than any I had ever known. The initial panicked cries, the distant sirens, the confused shouts that had pierced the morning's unnatural hush, had all withered away. Now, only the wind remained, a dry, rasping whisper that stirred the dust but carried no scent of life, no promise of rain. It was a dying breath across a dying world. My feet had carried me here, to the edge of what was once the Red River. Or perhaps it was simply instinct, a magnetic pull towards a place where water had once flowed, a memory of life in a landscape now utterly devoid of it. The path here had been a blurred journey through ghost streets, past skeletal remnants of what were once parks, now just barren earth, the outlines of flower beds like forgotten graves, the twisted metal of playground equipment glinting like broken bones. There were no shadows to guide me, only the flat, relentless glare reflecting off concrete and glass, bleaching everything into shades of sepia. My legs felt like lead, each step an effort, my chest tightening with every shallow breath. The air had become a heavy blanket, a phantom weight on my lungs, demanding more effort with each inhale, giving less in return. The riverbed lay before me, a vast, cracked expanse of baked earth. It was a landscape of a million fractures, like ancient pottery shattered and left to bake under an indifferent sun. The cracks spiderwebbed outwards, deep and jagged, mapping the slow desiccation of the earth. Where water once chuckled and flowed, carrying sampans and reflecting the verdant banks, there was only a dusty, forgotten scar. Along the distant banks, the stumps of trees stood sentinel, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers towards the anemic sky. Naked and shorn, their leaves, their very lifeblood, vanished without a trace. They looked like forgotten monuments to a lost civilization. I knelt, then sat, amidst the crumbling earth, the dust rising in a small cloud around me, settling on my clothes, on my skin, coating my tongue. The silence here was absolute, heavier even than in the city. There were no distant cars, no echoes of human despair, no rustle of anything living. It was the silence of a tomb, vast and encompassing. In this profound emptiness, the only sound that pierced the air was the ragged wheezing of my own breath. Each inhalation was a conscious effort, a strained gasp, a desperate pull against the thickening atmosphere. It sounded loud in the quiet, a harsh, grating reminder of my failing body in a failing world. Inhale, exhale. It was a struggle, a desperate, mechanical act. The air, thin and unyielding, offered little sustenance. My head swam, a dull ache throbbing behind my eyes. It was the slow, insidious grip of anoxia, creeping through my veins, blurring the edges of my vision. This was the world's slow suffocation, and I was merely a participant in its final, drawn-out act. Every breath was a countdown, a tangible measurement of how much life remained in the world. in me. I closed my eyes, seeking refuge in the cool darkness behind my eyelids, but even there the haze of the sky seemed to penetrate, a sickly yellow tint. In the quiet, with only the ragged rhythm of my breathing for company, memories began to unfurl, not like a flood, but like wisps of smoke, translucent and fragile. They were not sharp, painful recollections, but soft, mournful echoes, tinged with the dreamy quality of something forever lost. I remembered the scent of rain on newly wet earth, the way it lifted the fragrance of damp soil and green leaves into the air, a clean, vital scent that promised renewal. I remembered the banyan tree outside my window, its canopy a vibrant, pulsing heart of green, always swaying, always whispering secrets in the breeze. I could almost hear the rustle of its leaves, a sound that was once the very pulse of dawn, now replaced by this screaming void. Its shade was a cool haven on sweltering days, its roots, ancient and gnarled, a testament to time and resilience. It wasn't just a tree, it was a companion, a silent observer of my life, an anchor in the urban sprawl. Now, there was only the memory of light filtering through its emerald leaves, a memory so vivid it felt like a dream. And the flowers. Oh, the flowers. The riot of fuchsia bougainvillea, spilling over crumbling walls, the delicate white jasmine that perfumed the night, the proud crimson hibiscus that stood sentinel in front of every home. Each bloom, a tiny, vibrant universe, brimming with life and color. They were not just pretty things. They were the silent, tireless workers, the lungs of our planet, inhaling our exhaust, exhaling the very breath of our existence. We had taken them for granted, their quiet generosity, their endless, silent labor. Now, the silence was their answer. Their absence was a scream. The world had been so full of green, hadn't it? A tapestry woven from countless shades of jade, olive, emerald, lime, a living, breathing skin over the earth. Now it was stripped bare, exposed, like a raw wound. Concrete and asphalt, once softened by the benevolent embrace of leaves, now glared back, stark and unforgiving. The air was a heavy, lifeless blanket, a shroud for a dying world. This is it. A whisper resonated within me, soft but clear. This is the end. Not with a bang, not with fire or ice, but with a sigh. A slow, gentle fade into nothingness. The quiet was the most profound part. The silence of extinction. Inction. The word felt too small, too clinical, to encompass the vast, cosmic tragedy unfolding. It wasn't just the disappearance of a species or a million species. It was the complete, utter cessation of a fundamental process. The cycle broken, the song muted, the very breath of the planet stolen. I thought of the intricate web invisible to our bustling, self-absorbed lives that had sustained us. The tiny, unseen organisms in the soil, the delicate balance of photosynthesis, the silent, tireless work of every leaf, every blade of grass, every moss-covered stone. We had existed within this fragile, magnificent system, utterly dependent, yet utterly oblivious. We were children playing in a grand house, never once thinking about the foundations, the plumbing, the very air conditioning that made our lives comfortable. And now, the house was crumbling. This wasn't just the end of humanity. This was the end of complex life on Earth, or at least its current iteration. The vast, teeming biodiversity that had taken billions of years to evolve, the intricate dance of predator and prey, the gentle rhythm of decay and rebirth, all of it gone. All of it. The planet would remain, a silent, swirling marble in the vastness of space, but without the vibrant hum of life, without the rustle of leaves or the song of birds, it would be a cold, empty sphere. Cosmic museum of what once was. There was no anger, no panic left within me, only a deep, profound sadness that settled in my bones. It was the quiet acceptance of a finality so absolute it transcended all human emotion. There was nothing to fight, no enemy to rail against, no solution to seek. It was simply over. The universe, in its indifferent grandeur, had merely decided to turn a page, or perhaps to close the book entirely on this chapter of Earth's story. The sun continued its slow descent, its light growing weaker, more jaundiced, until it was just a pale, bruised orb hanging in the hazy sky. The world around me dissolved into deeper shades of gray, the cracked earth merging with the darkening horizon. The air grew colder, but no less heavy, each breath a victory and a defeat. I pressed my hands against the parched earth, feeling its cool, brittle surface, its ancient, silent resignation. It held no warmth, no memory of life, only the dust of what had been. And in that vast, overwhelming quiet, punctuated only by the fading gasp of my own life, I closed my eyes once more. The dreamlike state deepened, the line between reality and memory blurring into an indistinguishable haze. I could almost feel the cool touch of a banyan leaf against my cheek, almost hear the gentle murmur of the river as it flowed. A final, tender illusion before the long, silent night. The world was dying, not with a roar, but with a whisper, and I was listening. Whispers from the banyan. The world outside my window, a canvas strip bare, shimmered under a sun that felt both hostile and alien. The air, thin and tasting of dust, pressed against my lungs, a phantom weight where the gentle caress of oxygen-rich breeze should have been. My mind, a kaleidoscope shattered, struggled to piece together reality, yet kept sliding into the soft focus embrace of memory. It was a reflex, I supposed, a desperate lunge towards something familiar, something green, something that whispered of life when the present shrieked of its absence. And so, my thoughts drifted, not towards the immediate chaos that must surely be unfolding beyond my apartment walls, but to a place untouched by this new terrifying dawn. A place of deep, cool shade, where time itself seemed to slow to a lazy hum. I saw it, not with the sharp clarity of waking recollection, but through the diffusing lens of a dream, where edges blurred and colors softened into a muted palette of nostalgia. It was the banyan tree, the ancient AJK, Dogai, by the village temple. I could almost feel the rough, cool bark beneath my fingertips, the intricate labyrinth of its aerial roots that descended like stalactites from the heavens, reaching for the earth, rerooting, multiplying, creating an entire world beneath its vast canopy. Those roots, they weren't just supports, they were living sculptures, gnarled and twisted, thick as a grown man's thigh in some places, tapering to delicate tendrils in others. They rose and fell, forming natural benches, secret alcoves, and pathways for imaginary creatures. In my memory, they were indeed like wise old hands, the gnarled knuckles of an ancient guardian, perpetually outstretched, ready to cradle a small child, to offer a weary traveler a place to rest, to hold the very earth together with an unspoken promise of endurance. Each root, a wrinkled finger, spoke of centuries, of seasons cycling through sun and rain, of countless lives lived and dreamed beneath its watchful gaze. They held secrets, I was convinced, whispered down through generations of leaves and roots, stories of the village, of its joys and sorrows, all held within the silent, living history of the tree. The temple, Juai Chua Lang, nestled humbly beside it, seemed almost an extension of the tree itself, its moss-covered tiles and weathered wooden pillars echoing the tree's ancient stoicism. It was a place of quiet reverence, where the scent of incense would sometimes mingle with the earthy perfume of the banyan's breath, creating a spiritual balm that soothed the soul. But it was the tree, more than the temple, that held the true heart of the village for me. It was our communal living room, our library of whispers, our stage for forgotten games. Countless afternoons, sun-drenched and languid, unfolded beneath its immense whispering shade. It was a haven from the sweltering heat of summer, a natural air conditioner exhaling cool, oxygen-rich air that tasted sweet on the tongue. I remember the way the sunlight would filter through its dense foliage, breaking into a million fractured diamonds dancing on the dusty ground, shifting with the slightest breeze. It wasn't just light. It was a living, breathing tapestry of emerald and gold, constantly in motion, a silent symphony of nature's artistry. I was often there, a small, solitary figure, tracing patterns in the dust with a stick, or simply leaning against a particularly comfortable root, listening. Listening to what? Not to specific sounds, not always. More to the general hum of life that the tree seemed to amplify. The distant chirping of crickets, the rustle of invisible creatures in the undergrowth that now, in this barren present, I knew must be gone too. The soft cooing of doves nestled in its branches, their nests now, I realized with a fresh pang, exposed to the harsh, unforgiving sun, or simply gone. I remember the soft sigh of the wind through its leaves, a sound like a lullaby, a constant reassurance that the world was still turning, that life was abundant and everlasting. Now that sound was a gaping void, replaced by the grating silence of a wind that met no resistance, just whistled through empty air. Sometimes, my grandmother, Bangoi, with her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her ao dai of faded silk, would join me. She would sit cross-legged on a low, smooth root, her eyes half closed, a faint smile playing on her lips. She never spoke much under the tree. She didn't need to. Her presence and the trees were enough. They communicated in the silent language of generations, of roots and memory. She taught me to look at the patterns in the bark, to identify the different mosses growing on its ancient skin, to feel the vibrations of the earth beneath us. She once told me that the tree held the spirits of our ancestors, that its roots reached into the earth where they rested, and its branches reached into the sky where their spirits soared. It was a comforting thought then, connecting us to something larger, something eternal. Now that thought was a cruel twist of the knife. Where would the spirits go if their anchors to this world were severed? I remember the scent. Oh, the scent! A complex earthy perfume of damp soil, decaying leaves, fresh sap, and a faint, indescribable sweetness that only living plants could exhale. It was the smell of life itself, of growth, of decay and rebirth. It was the scent of home, of childhood, of safety. Now, the air was sterile, flat, carrying only the metallic tang of something lost, something irreversibly broken. My nostrils flared, seeking that phantom scent, finding only the ghost of it in my mind. Children from the village would gather there, their laughter echoing off the massive trunk, their tiny bodies scaling the lower roots, playing hide-and-seek among its many trunks. It was a meeting point, a place of shared stories and scraped knees, of whispered secrets and shouted triumphs. We would draw hopscotch grids on the packed earth, our bare feet slapping against the cool soil. We would share sticky rice cakes and sweet mangoes, the juice dripping down our chins as the banyan watched over us, a benevolent giant. The sheer joy, the uncomplicated freedom of those moments felt impossibly distant now, like a fairy tale from a forgotten book. The silence that now clung to my apartment, to the entire bleached world, felt like a judgment against those carefree sounds. There was no rustle of leaves, no chirping of birds taking refuge, no distant murmur of children's voices carried on the banyan's breath. Just this deep, profound hum that had swallowed the world whole. It was the sound of everything that was once alive, now gone. A hum of emptiness. The banyan tree, in its majestic, silent presence, had been more than just a tree. It was a living monument to time, to resilience, to the quiet power of nature. It had been the lungs of our village, the shade for our dreams, the storyteller of our past. Its irreplaceable beauty was not just in its colossal size or intricate root system, but in the life it fostered, the air it purified, the sanctuary it offered. It was a testament to the patient, enduring grace of the natural world, a world that, in this new dawn, was no more. The memory, though dreamlike, was sharp enough to pierce the protective haze around my heart. It was a poignant reminder, a whispered accusation. How easily we had taken it for granted, the steady breath of the world, the silent wisdom of the trees. How little we had truly appreciated the boundless, vibrant beauty that painted our days green. Now, standing on the precipice of humanity's last 24 hours, stripped bare like the landscape outside, I understood the depth of our loss. The banyan, in my mind's eye, stood defiant, magnificent, a ghost of what was, casting an immense heartbreaking shadow across the barren plains of my present. Its memory was a silent sob, a lament for a beauty that was truly, utterly irreplaceable. And the silence, oh, the silence of its absence, screamed louder than any sound could. Then, the last offering. The afternoon sun, no longer filtered through the familiar lattice of leaves, punched through the grimy window panes of Lin's small apartment with a brutal, unblinking clarity. It laid bare the dust motes dancing in the sterile air, illuminating every speck, every forgotten corner. The silence, now a constant companion, had deepened since the dawn, growing heavier, like a shroud woven from absence. It hummed in her ears, a resonant emptiness that vibrated in her bones. She moved through it like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the cool, worn tiles. The pantry, usually a warm cave of earthen pots and woven baskets overflowing with fresh produce, was a skeletal frame of empty shelves. The air, once fragrant with the subtle perfume of ripening fruit and the earthy scent of root vegetables, was now flat, odorless, save for the faint, acrid tang of despair. Lin ran her fingers over the smooth, dust-covered wood, a futile gesture, an echo of a habit she could not break. Her gaze drifted to a high shelf, half hidden behind a warped wooden panel that had always stuck. It was a place for things forgotten, things put away for lauder, a loiter that had now arrived, not as a future, but as an abyss. Her fingertips, light as butterfly wings, brushed against something soft, yielding. A small, nondescript cloth pouch, faded to a muted ochre, tucked deep in the recess. It felt oddly cool against her skin, as if it had preserved a sliver of the world that was. Her breath hitched, a fragile sound in the vast quiet. With a slow, deliberate movement, she drew it out. The drawstring, once a bright crimson, was now a pale, frayed thread. A faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted from it. A ghost of earth, water, and subtle sweetness. It was from the harvest 2 years ago, she remembered. A particularly abundant season, when the lotus ponds had shimmered with more blossoms than anyone could recall, their broad waxy leaves spreading like emerald saucers across the water's surface. Her grandmother, with her gnarled fingers and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 seasons, had insisted on drying a surplus of seeds. "For lean times, child," she'd murmured, her voice like rustling silk, or for when the heart simply craves the taste of the earth's quiet generosity. Lin had tucked it away, forgotten amidst the daily bounty. Now the lean times were not merely lean, but utterly desolate. She carried the pouch to the low wooden table by the window, the one where they used to share morning tea, surrounded by the exuberant greens of her mother's potted plants. Now, only the skeletal remains of empty ceramic pots stood there, barren sentinels in a bleached landscape. The light, harsh and unforgiving, illuminated the pouch in her trembling hands. With infinite care, she loosened the drawstring. A cascade of small oval kernels spilled into her palm. Dried lotus seeds. They were a dull, dusty beige, each one a miniature fossil, perfectly preserved. They felt hard and smooth, yet possessed a faint, almost imperceptible warmth, as if clinging to the last vestiges of the sun that had nourished them. She lifted one to her nose. The scent was there, stronger now, a faint nutty aroma, mingled with the ghost of something aquatic, something ancient. It was the smell of the pond, of the cool, dark mud from which the lotus emerged, pristine and unblemished. She brought the first seed to her lips. It felt impossibly small, a pebble of concentrated memory. She placed it gently between her teeth, not biting down immediately, but letting it rest there, a tiny, silent offering. The surface was unexpectedly smooth, then yielded with a faint, almost imperceptible, eye-clicking. A delicate, earthy sweetness bloomed on her tongue, an echo of a taste she had not realized she had lost. It was not the vibrant explosion of fresh fruit, but a subtle, lingering sweetness that unfolded slowly, like a quiet secret. With her eyes half closed, she chewed slowly, meticulously, grinding the seed into a fine paste-like consistency. Each faint crunch was a whisper, a distant drumbeat. It pulled her back, not through a vortex of vivid images, but through a gentle current of feeling, a dreamlike progression. She was a child again, sitting on the edge of the cool, damp earth, her small hands splashing in the murky water of the lotus pond. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil and the sweet perfume of the pink and white blossoms that floated like ethereal lanterns above the water. Dragonflies, iridescent jewels, darted through the humid air. Her grandmother, her aodai tucked up, waded knee-deep, her arms moving with a practiced grace as she reached for the plump seed pods, their surfaces riddled with perfect round depressions, each cradling a nascent future. But they were gone. The thought was a dull ache, a deep, pervasive sorrow that permeated the very marrow of her bones. The pond, once a vibrant tapestry of life, would now be nothing but a cracked, dry basin, a desolate scar on the face of the earth. The silence in her apartment was not just the absence of sound, but the echoing void of a world that had ceased to breathe. She took another seed. This time, as she chewed, she recalled the communal effort of harvest. The farmers, their faces bronzed by the sun, their laughter echoing across the water as they filled their baskets. The careful peeling of the pods, revealing the milky white seeds within, each one a promise of sustenance. The long, patient hours of drying them under the generous sun, spread on bamboo mats, their surfaces slowly hardening, concentrating the subtle sweetness, storing it for a day like this. It was a ritual as old as the earth itself, a silent communion between humanity and the green heart of the world. Now, the ritual was broken, the communion severed. The seeds were not just food. They were remnants, fragments of a forgotten song. Each one she consumed was an act of remembrance, a quiet homage. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took a third, then a fourth. The bitter reality of the present gnawed at the edges of the memory. The air outside, now devoid of oxygenating leaves, felt thin, metallic. The sun, which once coaxed life from the soil, now beat down with a desolate, destructive intensity. She pictured the banyan tree from her window, the one that had always greeted her mornings with its ancient, benevolent presence. Its vast canopy, a universe of rustling leaves and whispering branches, was now simply not there. The space it occupied was an emptiness, a hole, torn in the fabric of her world. The dust motes, once playful dancers in a shaft of sun, now seemed like the ashes of a lost age, swirling in the stillness. Each seed tasted of farewell, of the cool, refreshing water that once sustained the lotus, of the fertile earth that cradled its roots, of the life that pulsed through its veins, transforming sunlight into substance. She closed her eyes, letting the faint, nutty sweetness dissolve on her tongue, conjuring the phantom scent of rain on broad green leaves, the gentle hum of a hidden bee, the distant call of a kingfisher dipping into the pond. These were not just memories. They were sensations, almost tactile, brushing against her consciousness, like the wings of forgotten spirit. The small pile in her palm dwindled. There were only a few left now. The very act of holding them, of feeling their cool weight, was a connection, a final, tangible link to the world that had been. She wondered how many people across the globe were, at this very moment, finding similar, forgotten treasures. A last apple, a handful of dried berries, a stray grain of rice, each mouthful a silent, tearful elegy. She held the penultimate seed, turning it over and over between her thumb and forefinger. It felt smooth, polished by time and memory. This was it. The very last taste of green. The last echo of a world that had once flourished, vibrant and teeming with life. It was a profound and crushing realization. She placed it in her mouth, allowing it to linger, savoring the faint, delicate sweetness, letting it spread like a warm wave through her. It was a whisper of defiance, a quiet declaration of her enduring connection to the earth, even as it abandoned her. Then, only one remained. The final one. It lay in her palm, a lonely, resolute sentinel. She could feel the faint tremor in her hand, not of fear, but of profound reverence. This single, desiccated kernel held within it the ghost of forests, of rice paddies, of sprawling orchards and humble vegetable patches. It was the sum of all vanished green, distilled into a single, fragile form. She consumed it slowly, eyes open now, gazing out at the desolate panorama beyond her window. The bleached sky, the stark, skeletal trees that were no longer trees but gnarled, gray monuments to absence. The lingering taste in her mouth was a bittersweet symphony. The quiet earthiness, the subtle sweetness, the echo of life, and the profound, aching emptiness that followed. It was a taste of remembrance, of gratitude, and of a sorrow too vast for tears. The pouch lay empty beside her. The silence in the apartment had now become absolute, an unyielding presence. It no longer hummed, but simply was-toy. Lin sat very still, the lingering memory of the lotus seeds, a faint warmth in her stomach, a quiet benediction. It was a final meal, not of sustenance, but of soul, a silent homage to the bounty that once was, a gentle farewell to the world, swallowed whole by an unyielding quiet. The last 24 hours were shrinking, and with them, the last echoes of green. The deepening hush. The air. It had ceased to be the invisible current that buoyed life, that filled every lung with effortless grace. Now, it was a thick, viscous syrup, each intake a conscious, deliberate struggle, each exhale a weary sigh of surrender. The initial, frantic gasps that had rattled through the first hours of this new bleached world had settled into a shallow, desperate rhythm, a silent, internal dance of diaphragm and ribs, strained and aching. My chest tightened, not with sharp pain, but with a dull, pervasive pressure, an invisible hand slowly, inexorably, squeezing the breath from my very core. It was not a sudden suffocation, but a gentle, insidious strangulation, a gradual tightening that lulled the senses even as it starved the body. The world outside my window, already stripped bare of its emerald cloak, seemed now to be losing its very texture, blurring at the edges, as if dissolving into the same ubiquitous dust that danced in the new harsh light. Colors softened, muted, retreating into a palette of washed-out grays and sepia tones, mimicking the faded photographs of a life long past, a memory slowly bleeding from existence. The vibrant hues of yesterday were replaced by the desolate monotones of today, and with them, the very resonance of sound began to wane. My lungs burned, a persistent, low throb that echoed the slow, heavy beat of my own heart, a drum growing steadily weaker. Each breath was a conscious act, a deliberate battle against an unseen adversary, a silent plea for more of what was no longer there. It was a strange, almost peaceful kind of dying, not a violent rupture, but a slow, quiet fade, a gentle slipping away. And in that fade, a profound, unearthly silence began to unfurl, spreading its vast dark wings over the landscape. This silence, it had been born, initially, from the sudden, jarring absence of rustling leaves, the persistent chirping of insects, the joyful, careless songs of birds. But now, it was deepening, becoming something far more profound, far more terrifying in its totality. It was the silence of cessation, the quiet surrender of a once bustling, vibrant world. The distant hum of traffic, once a constant, comforting backdrop to urban life, had grown faint, then sporadic, then vanished altogether, swallowed whole by the expanding void. The urgent blare of horns, the cacophony of voices, the hurried, insistent footsteps on pavements, all dissolved into the heavy, thickening air, like sugar melting in tea. At first there were still echoes, a far-off siren, a child's raw, terrified cry, the distant, mournful bark of a forgotten dog. But these sounds too were fading, swallowed whole by the growing stillness, absorbed into the vast, soundless ocean that pressed in on all sides. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, a colossal entity poised on the brink of an ultimate universal sigh. And as the air thinned, as consciousness became a fragile, flickering flame in a relentless, unseen wind, the sounds of human activity began their inexorable wane. A car would swerve, its tires screaming briefly in a final, futile protest before impact. Then nothing but the profound, unyielding quiet. A door would slam shut, a muffled thud in the distance, then only the expanding void. Occasionally, a single desperate shout, swiftly muffled, quickly silenced. From my window, a vantage point I had clung to like a shipwrecked sailor to a spar in a boundless sea, I saw them. Figures on the street below, once moving with purpose, with the hurried, careless energy of daily life, now stumbled, swayed, then gently, almost apologetically, collapsed onto the barren pavement. Not with a shout, not with a struggle, but with a quiet dignity, as if accepting an inevitable repose. A man pushing a cart, laden with forgotten wares, his stride faltering, his head bowing slowly, until he crumpled beside his abandoned load, a silent, dust-covered statue. A woman, her arms still protectively around a small child, sinking slowly to her knees, embracing her little one as they both slipped, without a murmur, into the profound quiet that was consuming everything. There was no panic now, no mass hysteria, only a weary, shared acceptance, a collective sigh exhaled into a world that no longer had room for it. The last frantic flutters of 1,000 hearts fading into the vast silent tapestry of the ending. And I, Lin, watched it all unfold. My own lungs ached with a dull, persistent fire. My head swam with a faint, insistent dizziness, but my mind, strangely, remained clear. Sharp, though tinged with a pervasive, deep-seated sadness. There was no fear, not anymore. The terror had been a fleeting visitor in the first hours. A frantic, caged animal gnawing at my insides. But it had retreated like a shy, unwanted guest, replaced by a strange, almost serene calm, a quiet understanding that settled deep in my bones. It was as if the very air, in its slow, deliberate withdrawal, was also stripping away the capacity for frantic, desperate emotion, leaving only a contemplative melancholy, a quiet, almost detached observation. It felt like a dream, not the vivid, sharp, sometimes terrifying dreams of youth, but the hazy, half-forgotten ones that linger just beyond the grasp of waking memory, elusive and ethereal. A dream where the world itself was dissolving, morphing into an ethereal landscape of muted colors and hushed, almost imperceptible sounds. I was a solitary spectator in my own fading, an isolated observer of a global sleep, deep and profound, descending like a velvet curtain. I remembered then, a day from long ago, a day when the banyan tree outside my window had been a riot of emerald green, its ancient leaves whispering secrets to the passing wind, each rustle a tiny, living breath. The sunlight then had been filtered through that vibrant canopy, dappling the floor of my room with shifting patterns of light and shadow, a dance of living energy. I had sat there, a book unread in my lap, simply breathing, inhaling the sweet, earthy scent of damp soil after a summer rain, exhaling with a contented sigh, a simple act of belonging. The air had been rich, vibrant, alive, palpable presence, brimming with the very essence of life, teeming with the unseen magic of existence. It had been something I never consciously thought about, like the steady, ceaseless beating of my heart, an effortless, constant miracle taken for granted. And now, that miracle was receding, taking with it the very breath of the world, leaving behind only this hollow, aching void. The memory was sharp, vivid, yet tinged with the same dream-like quality as the present, blurring at the edges, shimmering like heat haze. It was a beautiful agony, recalling the abundance that was now so cruelly, utterly absent. I'd almost feel the cool kiss of those ancient leaves against my skin, hear the distant, drowsy hum of unseen bees, the gentle murmur of a nearby stream, long since silent. These were not just echoes of a past. They were ghosts of a physical sensation, spectral breaths drawn from a world that had ceased to be, that now existed only in the fleeting, fragile theater of my mind. The silence was no longer merely the absence of sound. It was a presence. A vast, immeasurable ocean of stillness that pressed in on all sides, filling every crevice, every empty space, leaving no room for even a whisper of dissent. It hummed, not with noise, but with the profound, resonant emptiness of a world shedding its final layers of life. A cosmic sigh exhaled into the void. It was the sound of a planet holding its breath, then letting it out in one long, imperceptible sigh. A breath that would never be drawn again. My own breath, once a shallow, desperate gasp, was now little more than a whisper, barely stirring the parched air in my lungs. My vision swam, speckled with shimmering dots, like distant, fading stars extinguishing one by one in an endless night. The room around me, once so solid and familiar, seemed to stretch and warp, its boundaries softening, dissolving into the increasing gloom, becoming fluid and indistinct. It was as if the air itself was a vast, heavy veil, thickening and obscuring the world, allowing only the barest, most ethereal outlines to remain. I could still hear the faint thrum of my own pulse, a slow, deliberate drumbeat, in the vast quiet, each beat a tiny rebellion against the pervasive stillness. And perhaps, if I listened very carefully, the whisper of my own thoughts, like tiny, fragile birds, fluttering against the thick glass of my fading consciousness. But even these were growing distant, muted, as if heard through layers of thick insulating cotton, becoming less my own and more a part of the grand, universal hum of cessation. The shared fate. That was the phrase that resonated in the hollow space where fear once resided. We were all embarking on this same journey, this quiet, inevitable descent into stillness. The rich and the poor, the powerful and the weak, the young and the old, all united in this final universal surrender. There were no more distinctions, no more divisions, no more battles to be fought. Only the shared heavy breath of a dying world, a collective expiration. And in that profound quiet, in that overwhelming sense of shared ending, I found a strange, melancholic beauty. A sorrowful beauty, yes, a beauty born of loss and cessation, but beauty nonetheless. The beauty of shared humanity in its ultimate humbling vulnerability. The beauty of a world, once so full of clamor and striving, finally finding peace in its own cessation, a return to the primordial stillness from which it had sprung. It was not the peace of triumph, nor the peace of resolution, but the deep, profound peace of absolute, unyielding stillness. My eyelids felt heavy, impossibly heavy, like ancient stone worn smooth by the passage of countless ages, eager to descend. But I fought the urge to close them, to succumb to the soft, dark oblivion that beckoned with such gentle persuasion. I wanted to see, to feel, to absorb every last tremor of this profound transformation, to witness the world's final, silent breath, to be a conscious part of its ultimate farewell. The silence outside was complete now, utter, unbroken. No distant wail, no final clang, no last human cry, not even the faint creak of a settling building. Just the infinite, echoing emptiness, a void that spoke volumes of what was no more. It was the sound of 1,000 cities falling silent, not with a catastrophic bang, but with an almost imperceptible, gentle fade. The sound of life's magnificent symphony, drawing to its final, hushed, eternal chord. It was like being submerged in a vast, warm ocean, the pressure gentle but relentless, pushing the air from my lungs, coaxing the light from my eyes, drawing me deeper into its boundless depths. A cosmic lullaby, sung by the absence of all that once was, a lullaby of cessation. And as the last vestiges of the world outside retreated into that impenetrable silence, I felt a wave of sorrow wash over me, gentle as a tide receding from a forgotten shore. A sorrow, not for myself, for my own fleeting existence, but for all that had been lost, for the vibrant tapestry of life that had been so carelessly unraveled, thread by precious thread, for the green, the breath, the songs that would never be sung again, the laughter that would never echo. It was a sorrow without tears, a silent, profound ache in the very core of my being, a universal grief. But beneath the sorrow, an acceptance had taken root, firm and unyielding, like an ancient, deep-rooted tree. This was the way it was meant to be, perhaps. A return to the primordial stillness, a grand, universal exhale, after an eon of restless breathing and striving. And I, Lin, was merely a tiny, fading ripple in that vast, quiet ocean, a single, conscious observer on the precipice of eternity, observing, accepting, waiting for the final, soft whisper that would draw me into the heart of the universal silence. A garden within. The world outside had become a sandpaper embrace, chafing at her skin, rasping in her throat. Each breath was a negotiation, a painful sucking in of air that felt thin and pre-used, heavy with the ghosts of what had once been. Lynn's legs, once nimble, now dragged like leaden weights, each step a monumental effort, against an invisible current that sought to push her down, to dissolve her into the endless, swirling dust. 24 hours. It felt like an eternity, a slow motion unraveling of every thread that bound the world together. The silence, so profound at dawn, had morphed into a suffocating pressure, punctuated only by the distant, mournful wail of sirens that had long since lost their urgency, now just a fading lament for a lost world. She had been moving, or rather drifting, since the first desperate hours, driven by an instinct she couldn't name. Not survival, not anymore. Perhaps just a longing for a final, gentle resting place. The city, once a riot of life and sound, was now a desolate canvas of concrete and skeletal branches. Every leaf, every blade of grass, had simply unmade itself, reduced to fine gray powder that coated everything, clinging to the air, settling in her hair, on her eyelashes. It was in her mouth, in her lungs, a constant reminder of the profound, irreversible loss. Her eyes, red-rimmed and gritty, scanned the desolate streetscapes. Twisted metal where cars had collided in panic, their occupants long gone, or perhaps simply absorbed into the quiet. Buildings stood like hollowed-out monuments to a forgotten past, their windows reflecting the brutal, unfiltered sun. There was no shade, not anymore, save for the fleeting shadow cast by a dying structure. Then she saw it, a silhouette, familiar yet heartbreakingly alien, against the ochre sky. It was the mango tree from the community park, the one where she used to sit with her grandmother, sharing slices of ripe, dripping fruit in the scorching summer heat. It stood there, a gnarled sculpture of charcoal gray bark, its branches reaching skyward like the skeletal fingers of a forgotten deity. There was no canopy, no vibrant green leaves, no promise of golden fruit, just a stark, eloquent testament to what had been. A strange, almost magnetic pull drew her towards it. Her last reserves of strength, reserves she hadn't known she still possessed, surged in a weak, final effort. Each step was a tiny victory against the crushing weight of reality. Her lungs burned, her throat was parched, and a dull ache throbbed behind her eyes. Yet the mango tree, even in its death, offered a strange solace, a familiar landmark in a world gone utterly mad. She stumbled, knees buckling, and then crawled the last few meters. The ground was no longer soft earth, but compacted dust, warm beneath her trembling hands. She reached the base of the tree, its bark rough and dry, devoid of the moss and lichen that once clung to it like tiny emerald jewels. With a sigh that was more exhale than breath, she slumped against its trunk, feeling the ghost of its resilience beneath her cheek. It was still here. It hadn't disintegrated entirely. A small mercy in an unforgiving world. The heat was relentless, a physical entity pressing down on her. The air was thick, heavy, carrying the faint, metallic tang of decay that seemed to cling to everything. She closed her eyes, not just to rest them, but to shut out the bleached, stark horror of the external world. With her eyelids pressed shut, a different kind of darkness descended. One that was not empty, but filled with the swirling remnants of memory, of what was, and what could never be again. In the quiet darkness behind her eyes, a whisper began. Not of dread this time, but of longing. A deep, aching yearning for the green, the vibrant, the alive. And then slowly, tentatively, as if conjured from the very dust motes dancing in her mind, a color bloomed. The first hint of green. Not the sickly yellow-green of decaying leaves, but a fresh, tender chartreuse, followed by a deeper jade, then an almost impossible emerald. It started as a single leaf, unfurling with exquisite slowness, veins pulsing with a luminous light. Then another, and another, until a whole canopy began to form above her. Not the dead mango tree, but a magnificent banyan, its aerial roots descending like ancient wisdom, its leaves broad and glossy, catching the imagined sunlight. The light itself was different here, filtered, dappled, dancing in shifting patterns on the forest floor. She felt a gentle breeze caress her skin. Not the hot, dry wind of the dying world, but a cool, damp breath, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of petrichor, the earth after a fresh rain. It was a scent she hadn't realized she was starving for, a primal aroma that spoke of life, of renewal, of an endless cycle. The dust in her nose, in her throat, seemed to dissolve, replaced by the clean, crisp perfume of damp soil and growing things. Then came the fragrance of 1,000 blossoms. Jasmine, its tiny white stars glowing in the imagined twilight of the undergrowth, releasing a heady, intoxicating perfume that wrapped around her, pulling her deeper into this manufactured reality. The sweet, creamy scent of frangipani mingled with the sharper, citrusy notes of kaffir lime leaves. Orchids, impossible in their vibrant hues, fuchsia, violet, sunset orange, hung from tree limbs, their delicate petals exhaling a subtle, almost spiritual aroma. Hibiscus, brilliant red and sunny yellow, flared like tiny suns in the emerald depths, their scent a gentle, sweet whisper. Sounds began to join the symphony. Not the screaming silence, but the gentle rustle of leaves. A living murmur that spoke of wind playing through foliage. The distant, lazy hum of unseen bees, a low, contented drone that promised honey and pollen. The frantic chirping of cicadas, a familiar lullaby of summer evenings. And then the most exquisite sound of all, the gentle trickling of water. A stream, clear and cool, winding its way over smooth pebbles, its melody a balm to her parched soul. She imagined dipping her fingers into its crystalline coolness, the water rushing over her skin, washing away the dust, the fatigue, the sorrow. She felt the cool, soft earth beneath her, no longer the compacted, dry dust, but rich, dark loam, alive with unseen life. She imagined moss, thick and velvety, cushioning her head, and the soft, cool press of ferns against her cheek. Giant taro leaves, broad and glossy, created miniature canopies above her, catching fat dewdrops that glittered like diamonds. This wasn't just a garden. It was every garden, every forest, every jungle she had ever known, distilled into its purest, most vibrant essence. It was the banyan tree from her childhood home, the mango orchard from her grandmother's village, the small potted herbs on her apartment balcony, the wild orchids from a long-forgotten trek in the mountains. It was the collective memory of green, woven into a tapestry so real, so tangible, that it eclipsed the dying world outside. She saw butterflies, their wings a kaleidoscope of color, flitting amongst the blossoms. Dragonflies iridescent and swift, darting over the imagined stream. Tiny, jewel-toned birds, their songs a chorus of joyous trills and warbles, a stark contrast to the deathly silence that had fallen upon the real world. She could almost taste the sweetness of ripe mangoes, the tang of fresh starfruit, the juicy burst of rambutan, a flavor so vivid it made her phantom tongue tingle. This was her final sanctuary. Not a place of escape, but a place of arrival. A destination she had been unconsciously seeking since the silent dawn. Here, beneath the imagined banyan, enveloped by the symphony of 1,000 greens, and 1,000 scents, the crushing weight of the world began to lift. The dust, the heat, the thirst, the aching lungs, they receded, becoming distant echoes, like the fading siren calls. She was no longer Lin, the last human gasping for air in a dying world. She was simply consciousness, floating amidst a riot of life. Her breath, in this imagined world, was effortless, deep, filled with the very essence of chlorophyll and burgeoning life. She was breathing the very soul of the plants she missed, inhaling their life force, becoming one with their silent, vibrant hum. The colors deepened, became richer, more saturated. The fragrances intensified, each note a poignant reminder of beauty. The sounds swelled, a choir of nature's endless bounty. She wasn't just seeing it, or hearing it, or smelling it. She was ginning it. She was part of the shimmering light filtering through the leaves, part of the cool mist rising from the stream, part of the silent, ancient wisdom of the banyan's roots. A profound peace settled over her, a serenity so complete, it felt like a homecoming. The whisper of dread that had haunted her for 24 hours finally fell silent, replaced by the gentle murmur of a living world. She let go, not of life, not entirely, but of the struggle, of the pain, of the fear. She surrendered to the embrace of the emerald dream, to the eternal garden she had conjured from the depths of her soul. And as the imagined light softened, and the fragrances mingled into a single, perfect perfume, Lin felt herself dissolve, not into dust, but into the infinite, vibrant green. She became a part of the rustling leaves, the flowing water, the ancient, enduring heartbeat of the living earth, a quiet echo in a world that had forgotten how to breathe. Mei, the final breath, a fading dream. As the last vestiges of light bled from the sky, painting the skeletal world outside in bruised purples and grays, a profound quiet descended upon the city. Not the sudden, jarring silence of a power cut, but a deeper, more ancient hush. It seeped into the cracks, swallowed the distant, faint moans that had echoed through the day, and wrapped itself around Lin like a shroud woven from air that was no longer kind. The air, thin and acrid, felt like velvet dust in her lungs, each breath a conscious, deliberate act, a struggle waged in slow motion against an invisible tide. Her chest rose and fell, shallow, almost imperceptible undulations beneath the thin blanket, a butterfly's wing beat against the vast, indifferent sky. The room, stripped of its vibrant life hours ago, was now an empty canvas, the outlines of familiar objects blurring in the encroaching gloom. Yet, for Lin, the physical space had begun to recede long before the light did. The rough texture of the sheet, the cool whisper of the air, the faint, distant throbbing in her temples. These sensations were becoming distant echoes, like sounds heard through many layers of water. Her body, weary and spent, was gently, slowly, relinquishing its hold. It was not a battle lost, but a surrender, a quiet, inevitable folding. Her consciousness, no longer tethered so tightly to the failing vessel, began to drift. It was like a kite string, gradually unspooling, letting the kite float higher, further, into a sky of its own making. The world of dust and dying breath faded, replaced by an inner landscape, vibrant and impossibly real. It began with a scent, a ghost of a memory so potent, it brought a fragile tear to the corner of her eye. The rich, damp earth, after a monsoon shower, dark and fertile, mingled with the sweet, intoxicating perfume of jasmine that used to climb the trellis outside her window. Then came the fainter, sharper tang of bruised lemongrass, the clean, almost antiseptic scent of eucalyptus leaves crushed between her fingers as a child, the deeper woody aroma of the banyan tree that had stood guard over her village for generations. And with the scents, colors bloomed, unfurling from the darkness behind her closed eyelids. Not the stark, bleached whites and grays of the outside world, but a symphony of greens so profound, so varied, they made her heart ache with a gentle, lingering sadness. The shimmering emerald of young rice shoots, swaying in an unseen breeze. The deep, almost black green of ancient moss clinging to gnarled roots. The vibrant lime of fresh fern fronds unfurling in the dappled light. And midst these greens, explosions of impossible color. The fiery crimson of hibiscus, its petals soft as velvet. The delicate translucent pink of lotus blossoms, floating on tranquil water. The rich, she was there, not physically, but in a way that transcended flesh and bone. She stood on soft, damp earth, the coolness seeping through the imagined soles of her bare feet. Overhead, a canopy so thick, so interwoven, that only slivers of golden light pierced through, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. It was the banyan, her banyan, its aerial roots descending like wise, aged fingers, its broad leaves rustling with a gentle sigh that was the softest music she had ever heard. This rustle was joined by the gentle murmur of a stream, unseen but felt, its cool, clear water trickling over smooth stones. And then, a sound she hadn't heard for what felt like an eternity, the soft, almost shy trill of a bird, hidden amongst the dense foliage, a tiny defiant whisper of life. Her memory, now untethered, began to weave itself seamlessly into this waking dream. She saw her grandmother, bent with age but nimble of finger, tending to her vegetable patch, humming a lullaby to the ripening gourds. The warmth of the afternoon sun on her skin, the smell of freshly turned soil, the satisfying plumpness of a tomato picked straight from the vine. She saw herself as a child, barefoot and reckless, climbing the low branches of a mango tree, the sticky sweetness of the fruit juice dripping down her chin, the distant shouts of her friends playing hide-and-seek amongst the bamboo grove. The rain, a sudden torrential downpour, splashing loudly on the broad leaves of banana plants, turning the pathways to mud, yet feeling exhilaratingly cool on her skin. The sensation of running through puddles, laughing, unburdened. This garden, her garden, was not merely a collection of plants, but a repository of all that was beautiful, all that was vital, all that was lost. Every leaf, every blossom, every imagined drop of dew held a memory, a feeling, a whisper of a world that once was. It was a space where the air was not thin but abundant, filled with the very breath of life, exhaled by countless leaves, purified by unseen processes. Here, her lungs did not ache. Instead, they expanded with an effortless grace, drinking in the cool, verdant essence. The boundary between her fading body and this vibrant internal world grew increasingly porous. The faint pain in her chest, the dull ache in her limbs, dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Her senses, which had been dulling in the real world, sharpened exquisitely in this imagined one. She could feel the delicate, almost imperceptible fuzz on the stem of a passion fruit vine, the cool, smooth surface of a polished river stone, the soft give of moss beneath her feet. The light here was always gentle, golden, never harsh, filtering through layers of green, creating a cathedral of living light. She moved deeper into the garden, or rather, the garden enveloped her. It was a comforting embrace, warm and soft, like being swaddled in the finest silk. The banyan's aerial roots seemed to reach out, not to bind but to cradle. The air was thick with the scent of flowers she couldn't name, but knew intimately. She saw glimpses of water lilies, their broad pads resting serenely on the surface of a pond, a flash of iridescent blue, as a dragonfly darted past. These were not sights from a single place, but a distillation of all the natural wonders she had ever known. All the stories her elders had told her, all the beauty she had absorbed throughout her life. Her breathing became even shallower now, barely a ripple. The faint hum of life within her was dimming, softening, like a candle flame flickering in a profound stillness. There was no fear, no struggle, only a gentle, unhurried unfolding, a letting go. The garden had become her entire world, eclipsing the stark reality of the room, the apartment, the city, the silent, barren planet. She was no longer Lynn, a woman fighting for breath, but a part of this verdant dream, dissolving into its lush embrace. Her final breaths were whispers against the gathering dark, so faint they were absorbed by the overwhelming quiet. The imagined scent of damp earth and jasmine filled her nostrils, then faded. Vibrant colors of the lotus and the hibiscus shimmered, then softened into a harmonious blur. The gentle rustle of the banyan leaves, the murmur of the stream, faded into the profound silence. There was no more effort, no more longing, just a complete, serene cessation. Her consciousness, light as a falling leaf, settled finally onto the soft, imagined moss, becoming one with the earth, with the silence, with the gentle, eternal quiet that now swallowed everything whole.